Donald stretched himself with pleasure and looked out the window. The weather was fine, the birds were chirping loudly, and the first rays of the warm summer sun were stubbornly breaking through the slightly closed blinds, promising a great day off. The man turned and looked fondly at his wife Beatrice, who was sleeping soundly. He smiled and once again thanked fate for the fact that he had met this wonderful woman. He wanted so much to hold her tight and kiss her, but he could not allow himself to disturb her when she was sleeping so sweetly. He could only lie quietly beside her and silently admire her beauty. They had met 2 years ago at a birthday party for his neighbour Cara, whom he had known since high school. There were not many guests at Cara's apartment that day. Donald poured himself a drink and began to get to know the rest of the company little by little, while Cara was following him everywhere. She tried to please him, laughed at every joke, and often touched his arm as if accidentally embarrassing Donald. 2 hours had passed since the party had started when suddenly the doorbell rang. Cara rushed to open it, and Donald asked one of the guests in surprise if anyone else was supposed to come. "Beatrice must have come," smiled Donald's interlocutor. "And who is she?" "She's perfection," sighed the guy. Donald was intrigued, and when a charming girl in a flying soft cream dress entered the room, he realized that his acquaintance was right. Beatrice really was incredibly beautiful. Donald was standing on the sidelines, occasionally exchanging boring phrases with Cara's classmate, when he was suddenly run into by someone pouring a cold drink on him. Thanks to his reaction, he managed to catch the girl who had swooped down on him. "Be careful," responded Donald calmly. Beatrice's beautiful, guilty eyes were looking at the guy. "I ruined your shirt," muttered the girl. There was a huge red stain on Donald's clothes. "It's okay. I live upstairs. I'll go change." Beatrice sighed in relief. "May I come with you? I feel terribly guilty." "Don't worry so much. It's nothing," answered Donald, trying to reassure her, and headed to his apartment. Beatrice quietly followed him. While Donald was changing, Beatrice was waiting for him in the living room, where she was looking at the pictures. On one of them, Donald was with his cousin. "I've always dreamt of having a sister," Beatrice said sadly when Donald returned. "But my mother never married after my father had left, and she raised me alone, so the dreams remained dreams." "I'm so sorry." Donald wanted to encourage her, feeling her loneliness keenly. "Well, what do you say if we don't go to Cara and stay at your place? This party's getting kind of boring," said Beatrice, and came so close to the guy that he felt her hot breath. "Do you have tea?" she asked with a smile, and without waiting for his answer, went into the kitchen. Donald was delighted at the idea, wishing in his heart that she would never leave him again. And so it happened. Beatrice stayed with Donald, and for over 2 years they have been happy together. Suddenly Beatrice opened her eyes and smiled at her husband. Donald leaned over to his beloved, kissed her, and gently touching her round belly, asked, "How is the best woman in the world and mother-to-be feeling?" "Fine," whispered Beatrice, and put her husband's hand on her belly. "Have you felt it? Our baby's awake too," she smiled, "and that means it's time for breakfast." Donald gently touched his spouse's belly with his lips and joyfully hurried to prepare breakfast for her. It should have been a usual day off. Donald was going to visit his parents at their summer house in the countryside. His father and mother had moved there 3 years ago. Beatrice had not been going with him for the last month. Donald returned from his parents' house only late at night, but to his surprise, Beatrice was not home. Anxious, he called his mother-in-law, Mrs. Mitchell. She didn't pick up the phone for a long time, and when Donald finally heard her distressed voice and poorly restrained sobs, a bad feeling hurt his chest. "What's the matter with Beatrice?" asked Donald in a trembling voice. "She's dead, Donald." Mrs. Mitchell could barely speak. "Some drunk driver hit her in a crosswalk." Donald could not accept the death of his beloved. A deep wound gaped in his soul. Everything around him had become indifferent. Neither Donald's parents nor Beatrice's mother were able to pull him out of the pit of depression. Running away from reality, Donald began to drown his sorrows in alcohol. He had never had this addiction, but now it was his only salvation. He often visited the grave of his wife and unborn son, talking to them and weeping bitterly. On one of the usual evenings, which Donald used to spend alone with a bottle and looking at his wife's pictures, Cara showed up on the doorstep of his apartment. She said she had come to support an old friend, and Donald found no strength to resist. He invited her to keep him company and put a glass of whiskey in front of her. "Rest in peace, Beatrice," Cara said, and drank the whole glass. Cara spent the evening with Donald, let him talk, cried with him, poured more and more whiskey for him. When Donald fell asleep, Cara did not go back to her place, but stayed at Donald's place. In the morning, when the man hardly opened his eyes and felt a hellish headache, Cara brought him some broth and persuaded him to eat. After taking the last spoonful, Donald felt better. Since then, Cara began visiting him frequently. Donald felt that Cara understood him, that she was ready to share his pain, and that he no longer needed to be alone. There was no disappointment or acute pity in her eyes, like in his parents or Beatrice's mother's. He had been alone for a year and felt an intense lack of a woman's warmth and tenderness. Donald felt she liked him and decided to start a relationship with her, but soon realized that he had made a mistake. Having got what she wanted, Cara quickly showed who she really was. She liked to have fun and spend money, but Donald was not comfortable with that way of life. The man had to quit his high-paying job because of the depression, and his income was low now, but Cara demanded more and more money from him. The woman increasingly began to accuse Donald of being unable to provide for her, and most of all, she was irritated by his memories of his late wife. "That's it. I'm sick of it," she shouted one day, coming in tipsy from the bar. "Look what you've turned into. How long are we going to remember her? Get over it. You won't find another one like her. What's wrong with me? We've been together for a year and we're still in the same place." Cara stared angrily at Donald, and then the man, glancing sadly at Beatrice's picture, suddenly said, "You're right. You'll never replace her for me. I'm sorry, but we have made a mistake. We shouldn't continue our relationship." Cara became hysterical. The woman swore, shouted curses at Donald, humiliated and insulted him in every imaginable word, beat the dishes, but in the end, achieving nothing, left his apartment in anger. Donald had never spoken to Cara again, but her words really touched a nerve. For the first time, he realized the mess he had made of his life, the way he had sunk, and he became deeply ashamed. He knew that Beatrice would definitely not approve of this, so, sobbing over his wife's picture, he gave her his word to pull himself together and make things right. From that day on, Donald never touched the bottle again. 5 years passed. Donald came to his senses, got his job back, and started earning good money. He began to communicate with his family again, tried to live an ordinary life, except that he did not believe that he would ever find love again. The pain of losing his beloved dulled, but on anniversaries the man still used to visit his wife's grave, bring her favourite chrysanthemums, and talk to her a long time. One day, Donald was coming home from the grocery store. He was going to cook one of Beatrice's signature dishes, to remember once again the time when they were so happy. As he crossed the square, he suddenly heard an incredibly beautiful singing that gave him goosebumps running all over his body. The voice was female and sounded familiar to Donald. He looked at the singer, wearing dark glasses, and suddenly stopped, unable to move. His heart was pounding frantically, his head rumbled, and in a second, Donald was next to the woman and had her in his arms. "Beatrice, my darling, how is it possible?" Donald was looking at the street singer with distraught eyes. "Let go of me," shouted the young woman, frightened. "My name is Lauren, not Beatrice. You must be mistaken." Donald came to his senses a little, and scrutinizing the woman, he noticed that she was looking at him strangely, as if through him, and suddenly he realized that she was blind. "I'm sorry, you look so much like my dead wife, just the same face," said the man, still not understanding how this was possible. Lauren didn't know how to respond. Then Donald approached a passerby and showed him a picture of his wife, asking him to confirm that there was a resemblance between her and the woman in the square. The man was very surprised and said he thought it was the same woman. "Have you heard?" rejoiced Donald. "I have not deceived you. But how is that possible? No, we must solve it." Donald took Lauren to the bench by the fountain and asked her to tell him about herself. The young woman admitted that she was blind from birth, grew up in an orphanage. Her mother left her there when she found out about her illness. Lauren sadly sighed and added that it was hard to live alone and blind, and it was almost impossible to find a job, so she had to sing in the square to get at least some money for food and clothes. "You have a stunning and unusual voice," said Donald excitedly, "and Beatrice has never sung. Perhaps she should have developed her skills. What if you and Beatrice are sisters? I think there's only one person who can help us figure it all out." Donald suggested that Lauren go with him to Mrs. Mitchell, Beatrice's mother. The girl thought about it and agreed, but on the condition that Donald would take her back to the same place after that. As soon as Mrs. Mitchell saw Lauren, Donald knew that they were about to discover a secret, and he was not mistaken. Mrs. Mitchell told them that her husband left her when she was still carrying her daughters under her heart. The woman was left all alone, but there were no relatives to help her, and she did not know whether she could cope. And when she found out about the congenital disease of one of the girls, she was afraid that she would not be able to give her proper care, and decided to leave her, for her own good. She was hurt, ashamed, and suffered madly, but she never decided to take back her abandoned child, and never revealed her secret to anyone. Mrs. Mitchell fell on her knees before Lauren, burst into tears, and begged her forgiveness. Lauren could not hold back her tears either, and embraced her mother. They were talking the whole evening. Looking at her, Donald, for the first time, felt that his heart did not hurt any more, and his soul was somehow calm and easy. Lauren began to live with her mother, happy that now she had a family. Donald often visited them, enjoyed Lauren's company, and listened to her singing with pleasure and awe. Her voice was truly magical, and she often gave him and Mrs. Mitchell concerts, after which they both felt their psychic wounds heal, and it became easier to breathe for the first time after so many years. A few months passed, and Donald realized that he was truly in love again. Lauren reciprocated, and a year later they were married. A little more time passed, and Lauren became pregnant. When it turned out that she was expecting twins, Donald was almost crazy with joy. He surrounded his wife with attention and care, protecting her as the dearest thing in his life. And so it was. Lauren gave birth to 2 wonderful boys. Despite their happiness, nobody in their family has ever forgotten about Beatrice. Her memory was carefully preserved, and every year Donald and Lauren came to her grave. One day they drove to the cemetery, leaving their sons under the care of their grandmother. As they approached the grave, Donald realized he had forgotten the flowers in the car. "Honey, I'll be back in a minute," he said to his wife, and hurried to the car. Lauren touched the cold gravestone with trembling hands and whispered, "I hope you will forgive me my happiness, because I actually live your life. It makes me very bitter." The woman's eyes became wet. Wiping her tears, she continued, "My dear sister, despite this, I am pleased. I love them all very much. Our mother, Donald, and the babies." "Lauren," whispered Donald, "we will never forget Beatrice, and you can never replace her. But you are you, and there is no one like you any more. I thank God that destiny has brought me together with you. I love you, my dear. I am confident that Beatrice is looking at us from heaven, and she is happy that we have healed each other." They stood like that together, hugging each other, and then, with a feeling of love and gratitude, they placed a bouquet of beautiful, soft cream chrysanthemums on Beatrice's grave and went home, where their sons were already waiting for them.